It was almost midnight. The bar had nearly emptied out. Grayson Hale sat in the dark corner at the far end of the counter, across from Troy, his right-hand man. The glass in front of Grayson was almost empty, but he wasn't reaching for another drink. He was watching something else. On the old TV behind the bar, the National Horse Racing Championship was being replayed. Monica Voss, the reigning champion, held the trophy in front of hundreds of cameras, her smile radiant, as if she was born to stand in that spotlight. A customer slapped the counter. Monica wins again. Nobody can touch that girl. Right then, the waitress clearing the table nearby glanced up at the TV. Just 1 second. Then she looked back down, kept wiping. Her steps were slightly uneven, her right foot dragging just enough to notice. The kind of unevenness that comes from hiding an old wound. Grayson caught it. His eyes locked onto that step. Troy followed Grayson's gaze and lowered his voice. Her name is Kira Dawson. She used to be a professional jockey. Last season, she nearly took down Monica Voss on the track. Then she vanished. Nobody knows what happened. Grayson set his glass down and watched Kira. She was carrying a tray back toward the counter. Back straight, face blank, the kind of person who had learned to endure without needing anyone to see. No one in the bar that night knew that the girl wiping their tables had once nearly defeated the woman smiling on that TV screen. And no one knew that the man sitting in the dark corner would pull her back to the track. Back to the fight she thought she had already lost. But the price of that return, none of them could have seen it coming. If you want to find out how Kira overcame it all, stay with us until the end. Hit like and share this video to support our channel. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story. The black car glided through the empty streets of Chicago. Grayson sat in the back seat, his eyes fixed beyond the window glass. But his mind wasn't there. The image of the bar waitress kept replaying in his head, not because she was beautiful, or because she was pitiful, but because of the way she had looked up at the TV, then lowered her head. Just 1 second. 1 second was enough for Grayson to realize that girl was swallowing down something far larger than a night shift in a cheap bar. Troy sat in the front seat, looking back at Grayson through the rearview mirror, waiting. He knew his boss. When Grayson stayed silent for that long, it meant he was calculating, and when Grayson had finished calculating, there would be an order. Kira Dawson, Grayson said, his voice neither rising nor falling, as though he were reading a name from a line in a contract. I want to know everything about her. Her past, her present, the reason she disappeared from the racetrack. Don't leave anything out. Troy nodded. He didn't ask why. After working with Grayson long enough, Troy understood that the question why was a luxury that those under Grayson's command didn't need to ask. 2 days later, Troy placed a file on Grayson's desk. It wasn't thick, but it was enough. Grayson opened it, skimmed through it, then lifted his eyes to Troy. Summarize it. Troy stood straight, his arms folded across his chest, and began speaking in an even voice, like he was reading a report. Kira Dawson, 27 years old. Her father's name was Jim Dawson. He used to be a horse caretaker at Whitfield Farm on the outskirts of Kentucky, one of the largest farms in the South. Kira started working at that farm when she was 19, the first year she officially entered the profession. Her father taught her to ride horses from that point on. From what I found, she had an inborn gift. Not the kind trained properly with money, but the kind that understands horses by instinct. Grayson said nothing. He only turned another page in the file. Troy continued. Her father died of an illness a few years ago. After that, Kira climbed her way up alone. She competed in regional tournaments, won one after another, then was accepted into a professional racing team. To put it bluntly, she was a woman in a world made up almost entirely of men, and the daughter of a hired horse caretaker among rich kids, among heirs from prestigious horse racing families. She had no money, no connections, no one backing her, only talent. And then? Grayson asked, his voice still calm. Last season, Kira made it into the national finals. She was the strongest contender. Everyone said she was going to win. But before the competition, during a training session, she had an accident on the racetrack. A serious injury. She had to undergo surgery. The hospital bills swallowed everything she had. After that, the racing team cut her contract, and the sponsor withdrew. Her career collapsed in less than a month. Grayson closed the file and placed his hand on the surface of the desk. That accident. How was it handled? A training accident. No one investigated further. The file was closed immediately after that. The office fell silent for a few seconds. Grayson leaned back in his chair, his eyes lifting toward the ceiling. Then he asked, his voice softer, though Troy knew it was the most dangerous kind of softness. A real accident? Or did someone arrange it? Troy drew in a breath. It isn't clear yet. I don't have enough data to conclude. Grayson stood up, walked to the window, and looked down at the city below. He didn't turn around when he spoke his next sentence. Keep digging. I want to know exactly what happened on that racetrack that day. Not the version people want everyone to believe, but the real version. Troy nodded again, then left the room. The door closed, and Grayson remained standing by the window. Outside, Chicago at night blazed with millions of lights. But in Grayson's mind, there was only one image now. The girl in the bar looking up at the TV, then lowering her head. 1 second. Then she went on wiping the table, as though she had grown used to losing everything. 3 nights later, Grayson returned to the bar. This time, he came alone, without Troy. He chose a small table in a hidden corner, ordered a glass of liquor, and sat there. The bar was emptier than the last time, with only 2 or 3 groups of customers scattered around, the background music low, just loud enough to fill the spaces between the broken conversations of drunk people. Kira worked like she did every night. She carried trays, wiped tables, cleared glasses and cups, and didn't look at anyone for longer than 1 second. She didn't recognize Grayson, or if she did, she didn't seem to care. To her, every customer was the same. They came, they drank, they left, and she cleaned up whatever they left behind. Grayson watched her for 2 full hours, not in the way of a man staring, but in the quiet manner of someone used to judging people by watching how they acted when no one was paying attention. He saw that she never complained, even when customers left their tables in a mess. She didn't make small talk with her coworkers. She worked quickly, neatly, precisely, with the manner of someone who had once been disciplined in a place far harsher than a bar. Close to 1 o'clock in the morning, the place was almost empty. Kira came to the area near Grayson's table, set down her tray, and began wiping the table beside him. Grayson spoke, without circling around the point. Kira Dawson. Kira's hand stopped. She looked up at him. Her eyes weren't frightened, only guarded, the kind of guardedness that belonged to someone who had grown too used to being struck by surprise, someone always ready to defend herself. You know my name? I know more than your name, Grayson said, his voice calm, as though he were talking about the weather. I know you used to be a professional racehorse jockey. I know you almost won the national championship last season. And I know you're wiping tables in a bar at 1 o'clock in the morning instead of standing on a racetrack. Kira clenched her hand around the cleaning cloth, the edges of her eyes sharpening. What do you want? I have a horse farm on the outskirts of Chicago. A private racetrack, good horses, no one to bother you. If you want to train again, you can come there any time. Silence. Kira looked at Grayson as though she were trying to read what trap might be hiding behind that offer. Then she released 1 sentence, her voice cold as ice. I don't know who you are, and I don't need anyone's pity. She turned away, picked up the tray, and walked off. Grayson didn't call her back. He wasn't the kind of man who called anyone back. He took a small piece of paper from the pocket of his suit jacket, wrote a few lines on it, then placed it beneath the glass of liquor, still half full. He stood up, left money on the table, twice what a single glass of liquor usually cost, and walked out of the bar without looking back. Kira returned to clear that table 5 minutes later. She picked up the money, put it into the tip jar, then lifted the glass. The piece of paper remained on the wet tabletop. She picked it up and read it. An address. No name, no phone number, no message. Only an address on the outskirts of Chicago. Kira stood there for a few seconds, her fingers gripping the piece of paper tightly. Then she looked toward the door. Grayson was already gone. She crumpled the paper lightly, meaning to throw it into the trash. But her hand stopped halfway. She folded the paper, slipped it into the pocket of her apron, then went on clearing the table as though nothing had happened. The first night, Kira returned to her rented room, took off her apron, and the piece of paper fell onto the floor. She picked it up and placed it on the table without opening it. The second night, she unfolded the paper, read the address again, then folded it and tucked it beneath her pillow. She lay there staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Not because she was thinking about the man in the bar, but because that address had stirred something she had tried to bury for an entire year. The sound of hooves, the feeling of wind on her face when a horse broke into a full gallop, the smell of wet grass on the racetrack in the early morning. All the things she had told herself no longer belonged to her. On the third night, Kira finished her shift, changed her clothes, and stepped out of the bar. She didn't go back to her rented room. She caught the last bus to the outskirts of the city, then walked another 20 minutes along a dark road, with vast meadows stretching on both sides. In front of her stood a large iron gate, and beyond it were the shadowed shapes of stables and a racetrack blurred beneath yellow lights. Kira stood before the gate, her hand gripping the strap of her bag. She drew in a long breath, as though she were preparing for a race. Then she stepped inside. The farm manager had been notified in advance. When Kira stepped through the iron gate, a middle-aged man in a thick coat came out from the main building, nodded to greet her, and didn't ask many questions. He simply said that she could look around the farm, then led her inside. The farm was far larger than Kira had imagined when she was standing outside the gate. A private racetrack curved around the property, its surface carefully maintained. The stables were built from oak, clean and orderly, each stall spacious, with ventilation fans and an automatic water system. Kira walked past one stall after another, looking at the horses inside. They were all high-quality racehorses, and she recognized that immediately with the experience she had. But she didn't stop at any stall until the manager brought her to the very last one. "This one's name is Storm," he said, his voice carrying a little hesitation. "A stallion, pure black, the fastest horse on the farm, but no one here can ride him. 3 people have tried, and all 3 were thrown off before they could finish half a lap around the track. Mr. Hale kept him because this horse has good bloodlines, but he doesn't let anyone near him." Kira looked into the stall. Storm stood in the far corner, all 4 legs planted firmly, his head held high. Pure black hair covered his entire body, without a single white mark, sleek and shining beneath the yellow light. The horse's eyes looked straight at Kira, not fierce, but not friendly either. He was judging her, the same way she was judging him. Kira opened the stall door and stepped inside. The manager startled and moved as if to stop her, but she was already inside. Storm immediately turned to face her, his nostrils flaring, one foreleg taking a step back. Anyone else would have retreated, but Kira didn't step back. She didn't move forward either. She stood still in the middle of the stall, both hands loose at her sides, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing even. She didn't look straight into Storm's eyes, because looking straight into a horse's eyes was a challenge. She looked downward, to the side, letting Storm know she wasn't a threat. That was what her father had taught her. Never force a horse. Let the horse choose whom to trust. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes. The manager stood outside the stall door, holding his breath. Storm stood still watching Kira. Then the horse lowered his head and took 1 step forward, then another. He brought his muzzle close to Kira's shoulder and inhaled. His hot breath passed through the thin fabric of her shirt. Kira still didn't move. She waited. Then Storm gently nudged his muzzle against her shoulder, the greeting of a horse that had accepted someone's presence. Kira slowly lifted her hand and placed her palm on Storm's neck. The black coat beneath her hand was smooth and warm. She stroked him lightly, slowly, following the direction of his hair. Storm stood still, neither startling nor backing away. Outside, the manager let out a long breath, his eyes wide. He had worked on this farm for 3 years, and he had never seen Storm allow anyone to touch him that quickly. Kira didn't know how long she stood in the stall with Storm. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe longer. But when she turned to look at the manager and asked, "Can I ride him?" her voice wasn't asking permission. She was informing him. The manager hesitated, but in the end, he brought the saddle and bridle. Kira saddled Storm herself, every movement precise, practiced, as though she had never left this work behind. When she placed her foot in the stirrup and lifted herself onto Storm's back, her hand trembled. Her whole body trembled. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. It had been almost a year since she had sat on a horse's back. It had been almost a year since she had believed she would never sit in this place again. Storm stepped out of the stall, crossed the yard, and reached the head of the track. Kira tightened her knees slightly, giving the signal. Storm began to run, slowly at first, a light trot, his hooves striking evenly against the track, then faster still. Wind rushed against Kira's face. She leaned down, close against the horse's back. Her hair flew behind her. The sound of hooves pounding the ground came fast and steady, like a second heartbeat. Kira closed her eyes. In that moment, she wasn't the girl serving drinks in a bar at midnight. She wasn't the person drowning in debt, losing everything, trying to survive one day at a time. She was a jockey. She belonged to the racetrack. She had always belonged to the racetrack. Storm completed 1 lap, then 2, then 3. Kira didn't stop. She didn't want to stop, because if she stopped, she would have to return to reality, and reality had no wind on her face, no sound of hooves, no feeling of freedom that she had lost for an entire year. When she finally pulled the reins and slowed Storm down, only then did she open her eyes. Her breathing was sharp, her hands still trembling faintly, but on her lips there was something she had almost forgotten. Not a smile. Not yet, but a certain light in her eyes, one that had gone dark before. About 50 meters from the racetrack, Grayson stood leaning against the wooden fence, his arms folded across his chest, silently watching Kira ride Storm through the darkness. From that night on, Kira returned to the farm every day. Her shift at the bar ended at midnight. She caught the last bus to the outskirts of the city, reached the farm at around 1 o'clock in the morning, trained until nearly 4 o'clock, then went back to her rented room to sleep for a few hours before the sun came up. That schedule was enough to drain anyone dry, but Kira didn't complain. She was used to living on willpower instead of strength, and the racetrack at midnight was the only thing that made her feel truly alive. Storm waited for her every night. That surprised the people working on the farm more than anything else. The pure black horse, who had never let anyone near him, now lifted his head the moment he heard Kira's footsteps in the stable hallway, his ears tilting toward her. He only allowed her to saddle him. He only allowed her to ride him. He only obeyed her commands. To everyone else, Storm was still the fierce horse no one dared to approach. During the first week, Kira only rode slowly. She needed to grow used again to the feeling of sitting on a horse's back at high speed. She needed to regain the coordination between her hands, her legs, and the center of balance in her body. Her muscles had weakened so much after a year without training, and during those first laps, she was so exhausted she had to lie low against Storm's back, just to keep her balance. But she didn't stop. Every night, she rode 1 more lap. Every night, she pushed herself a little faster. By the middle of the 2nd week, a man appeared at the farm. He was in his 50s, with a lean, wiry build and sun-browned skin, the kind of skin belonging to someone who had spent his whole life outdoors. He introduced himself as an acquaintance in the horse racing world, said he had heard someone was training there, and wanted to stop by to watch and help if needed. Kira looked at him, then looked toward the farm's main building, where she knew Grayson sometimes appeared. She understood. No acquaintance in the industry naturally showed up at 2 o'clock in the morning on a private farm, unless someone had arranged it. But she said nothing. He was a good trainer. She recognized that immediately from the way he watched her first lap, and pointed out 3 technical mistakes she had overlooked. She needed that help, and pride wasn't worth as much as the time she was losing. A few days later, another person appeared, a sports doctor, specializing in rehabilitation. He checked the condition of her leg, gave her physical therapy exercises, and monitored her training every night. Kira didn't ask who had sent him either. She simply followed the instructions, seriously and precisely, the way she did everything. Under the trainer's guidance, Kira changed quickly. She corrected her riding posture, adjusted the way she held the reins through the turns, and learned how to read Storm's running rhythm so she could accelerate at the right moment instead of forcing the horse to run fast from the start. Storm responded to her as though the two of them shared the same mind. When Kira leaned left, Storm turned left. When she tightened her knees lightly, Storm accelerated. No hard pull on the reins, no shouting, only small signals that only the two of them understood. By the 4th week, the trainer began timing her. During the first laps, Kira's time was still far from her old record, but every night, the number on the stopwatch dropped a little. By the 6th week, she was already faster than most male jockeys at the regional level. By the 8th week, one evening, Kira and Storm completed a lap with a time less than 2 seconds away from her old record at the national championship. The trainer stood beside the track, looked at the stopwatch, then looked up at Kira, shaking his head slightly, not in disappointment, but in astonishment. Kira pulled the reins and slowed Storm down. She bent forward and gently stroked the side of Storm's face. The pure black horse was breathing hard, steam rising from his body in the cold night air. Kira whispered something into Storm's ear, then lifted her head. On her lips, for the first time since the story began, there was a smile. Not wide, not radiant, just a small smile. like a faint light slipping through the crack of a door, in a room that had been dark for far too long. But it was there, and it was real. While Kira trained every night on the racetrack, Troy was doing his own work in an entirely different world. It took him nearly 6 weeks to dig deep into Kira's accident from the year before, and what he found made the picture far more complicated than a simple training accident. That morning, Troy came to see Grayson in his office. He didn't bring any paper files this time. He only sat down across from Grayson and began to speak. The security camera footage from the racetrack area where Kira had her accident was erased. All of it. Not erased by an automatic cycle, but manually deleted, about 3 days after the accident. I contacted the company that managed the camera system for that racecourse. They confirmed that someone requested the deletion, but they didn't keep any record of who gave the order. Grayson listened without interrupting. Troy continued. There's no visual evidence. That's a dead end. But I found something else. Troy paused for a beat, as though weighing how to present it. Then he went on. I traced back the equipment preparation process for that training session. Kira's saddle was inspected and maintained by a professional saddler named Ray Whitmore, who had been hired by the racecourse on a seasonal contract. Ray had made saddles for many national-level jockeys for more than 10 years. There's no reason to question his craftsmanship. But? Grayson asked, his voice flat and calm. But I found Ray. It took 2 weeks to figure out where he was, because after Kira's accident, he quit his job at the racecourse and moved to work at a small leather goods shop on the outskirts of Louisville. When I showed up, he panicked. The kind of panic that belongs to a man hiding something very big. Someone who had lived in fear for an entire year. Troy took out his phone, opened an audio file, and placed it on the desk in front of Grayson. I spoke to him 3 times before he was willing to open his mouth. The 3rd time, he told me everything. Ray Whitmore's voice came from the phone, trembling and low. The voice of a man speaking aloud something he had carried inside for far too long. Ray admitted that before Kira's fateful training session, someone had contacted him by phone. That person asked him to replace the girth strap on Kira's saddle with an old strap that had been naturally worn down over time. The strap looked completely normal when inspected by eye, and no one could have realized it had been weakened. But under heavy force at high speed for a prolonged period, it would snap. That person paid Ray a large sum of money, many times more than his income for an entire month. Ray knew what he was doing was wrong, but he was in debt, and that money was enough for him to pay it all off. He convinced himself that maybe the strap wouldn't break. Maybe nothing would happen, but it did break. And Kira fell from the horse at high speed, suffered a serious injury, and her career was shattered. Ray kept every message exchanged with that person on his phone, not because he wanted to use them as evidence, but because he was afraid. He was afraid that if he deleted the messages, he would have nothing left to protect himself if that person came back to pressure him. For an entire year, Ray lived in silence because he was forced to stay silent. The person who had contacted him called again once after the accident, making it clear that if he opened his mouth, he would lose everything. Ray quit his job, moved away, and tried to disappear. Grayson listened to the entire recording, his face expressionless. Then he asked, "The phone number that contacted Ray, who does it belong to?" Troy was ready for that question. I cross-checked it. That number is registered under the name Craig Hoffman. Hoffman is an assistant trainer on Monica Voss's support team. He's worked for Monica's team for 5 years, responsible for managing her equipment and logistics at every tournament. The office fell silent. Grayson didn't speak right away. He sat there, both hands resting on the surface of the desk, looking at the phone lying between them. Not angry, not surprised. Grayson wasn't the kind of man to be shocked by the ugliness of human beings. He was only processing the information, placing each piece into the right position in the larger picture he was building inside his mind. "Ray Whitmore," Grayson said after a while. "Is he willing to come forward and testify?" "Not yet. He's still afraid. But if his safety is guaranteed, and he has a stable new job, I think he'll agree. He's carried this guilt for too long. I could see that when I spoke to him. He wants to tell the truth. He just doesn't dare to yet." Grayson nodded. "Take care of him. A new job, a safe place to stay, and no one knows where he is until I say so. Keep all the messages, the recording, and back them up in at least 3 different places." Troy took note. "And Kira? She needs to know this." Grayson stood up and walked to the window. He looked outside, silent for a few seconds. Then he spoke, his voice slow and clear, each word distinct. "Keep everything. Don't tell Kira yet. It isn't time." Grayson wasn't the only one watching what was happening at the farm. Barrett had noticed it for a long time. Barrett had been in charge of finance and external relations in Grayson's organization for nearly 7 years. He wasn't the kind of man who was loyal out of affection, but loyal because of interest. When the organization's interests were secured, Barrett was an effective right hand, but when he felt those interests were being threatened, his instinct for self-preservation would overpower everything else. And lately, Barrett felt something was changing. The spending on the horse farm had risen abnormally. A professional trainer had been hired at a fee that wasn't cheap at all. A private sports doctor. The farm was operating almost 24 hours a day instead of only during the daytime as before. Barrett didn't need anyone to explain. He investigated on his own and learned that all of it revolved around a female jockey training there every night. One afternoon, Barrett went to see Grayson. No appointment, no one with him. He stepped into the office, closed the door, and sat down in the chair across from Grayson, as though this were a meeting between two equals. "Grayson, I'll be direct," Barrett began, his voice not harsh, but not courteous either. "I know about the female jockey at the farm. I know you're pouring money into her. The trainer, the doctor, the entire farm running to serve one person. I'm not asking about your personal reasons, but I have to say this organization isn't a charity fund, Grayson. We have investments that need handling, partners waiting, and our resources aren't unlimited." Grayson sat still and listened until Barrett had finished. He didn't interrupt, didn't show annoyance. When Barrett stopped and waited for a response, Grayson finally spoke, calm as though he were talking about the weather. "I'm using my money. You take care of your work." Just one sentence. No explanation, no justification, no argument. Barrett looked at Grayson, waiting for more, but there was nothing more. Grayson had already turned his eyes back to the laptop screen in front of him, as if the conversation had ended. Barrett stood up, forcing his anger down. He had worked with Grayson long enough to know that once Grayson had made a decision, no one could change it. But Barrett wasn't the kind of man who accepted being pushed to the outside. He left the office and walked down the hallway, already calculating in his mind. Barrett had a world of his own, one that Grayson knew about but didn't fully control. He was deeply involved in the horse racing betting world, where money moved fast, and relationships were more complicated than any deal Grayson had ever handled. Through the betting circle, Barrett knew the Voss family, one of the richest and most powerful families in horse racing in America, and the daughter of that family, Monica Voss, was the reigning champion whom Kira Dawson had almost defeated last season. That evening, Barrett sat in his private car, took out his phone, and scrolled through his contacts. He stopped at one name and pressed call. Monica Voss answered after the third ring. "Barrett, it's been a long time since I heard from you. What's going on?" Monica's voice was polite but guarded. She wasn't the kind of person who took an unexpected call without asking questions. "I have some information you should know," Barrett said, lowering his voice, the tone of someone sharing something that shouldn't be said over the phone but saying it anyway. "Kira Dawson is training again. Every night, at a private farm on the outskirts of Chicago." Silence on the other end of the line. Barrett continued. "That farm belongs to Grayson Hale. I don't know if you know that name, but Hale is a dangerous figure in Chicago's underworld. He's pouring money and resources into Kira, a top trainer, a private doctor, the best horse on the farm. If she returns to the racetrack next season, you'll have an opponent, Monica, and this time, she has someone backing her." Monica said nothing for a few seconds. Barrett could hear her breathing through the phone, steady but heavier than usual. "Why are you telling me this?" Monica asked, her voice trying to stay calm, though there was something sharper at the end of the sentence. "Because I have my own interests," Barrett answered bluntly. "Grayson is losing focus. That affects my work. I don't need him getting any deeper into the horse racing world, and you have your own reasons." Monica stayed silent for a few more seconds. Then she said, her voice slow and controlled, "I understand. Thank you, Barrett." She hung up. She set the phone down on the table. Her hand gripped the arm of the chair, her knuckles turning white. Kira Dawson was coming back. That name was like a nightmare Monica had thought had ended long ago. She had done everything to make sure Kira would never stand on a racetrack again. Everything. And now Kira was training again, with a good horse, with a good trainer, with a man standing behind her whom even Barrett called dangerous. Monica stood up and walked to the window, looking out. She wasn't panicking. Monica Voss never panicked, at least not where anyone could see. She was only calculating. The information Barrett had just given her was a weapon. She didn't yet know when or how she would use it, but she would keep it. And when the right time came, she would use it. 2 weeks after the call between Barrett and Monica, Kira did something she had delayed for many days. She went to Churchill Downs in the morning, not to train, but to register for the next season's competition. This was the first time she had appeared again in the horse racing world since disappearing nearly a year earlier. The racetrack was crowded that morning. Jockeys were training on the track, trainers stood scattered along the fence, and the sound of hooves struck steadily against the ground. Kira walked through the registration area with her head lowered, trying to attract as little attention as possible. But she couldn't become invisible. The name Kira Dawson had once echoed throughout the horse racing world last season, and her face wasn't easy to forget. A few jockeys resting on the benches recognized her. Some lifted their heads and looked, surprised, as though they had seen someone dead suddenly appear in the middle of the crowd. Some turned away indifferently, not caring, and there were small whispers that Kira heard, even though people tried to keep their voices low. "Is that Dawson? I thought she retired. I heard she's serving drinks at some bar in Chicago." Kira didn't look at anyone. She went straight to the registration counter, took a form, sat down at an empty table, and lowered her head to fill in each line. Name, age, racing license number, competition history, registered horse's name. Her hand wrote steadily, not trembling, not hesitating. However she felt inside, she let nothing show on the outside. Monica Voss saw Kira before Kira saw her. Monica was riding on the training track, and when she rounded the bend near the registration area, her eyes caught the image of the girl sitting with her head lowered, filling out papers. Monica drew in the reins, slowed her horse, and looked more closely. Then she stopped completely. She got down from the horse, handed the reins to an assistant standing nearby, and walked straight toward Kira. Her steps were confident, her chin lifted high, the walk of someone used to owning everything around her. Kira was halfway through the last line on the form when a shadow fell across the table. She looked up. Monica stood there, both arms folded across her chest, looking down at Kira with a smile as thin as a blade. "Kira Dawson," Monica said, her voice sweet in the way sweetness can have thorns. "I thought you'd chosen your proper place already, carrying trays in a bar, wasn't it? It does suit you." Kira didn't answer. She looked at Monica, her face expressionless, then lowered her head and continued writing. Monica wasn't used to being ignored. She took another step closer, lowering her voice just enough for only Kira to hear. "I heard you've got some rich man keeping you so you can play with horses again. A private farm, a private trainer, a private doctor. How luxurious. But still, the daughter of a hired horse caretaker is still the daughter of a hired horse caretaker, even with a rich man backing her. You want to race against people born into racing families? Know your place, Kira." Kira set the pen down. She stood up slowly. She wasn't as tall as Monica, but the way she stood, back straight, shoulders open, eyes looking directly ahead, made that difference in height meaningless. "The results on the racetrack will answer," Kira said, her voice calm, neither raised nor trembling. "Not here." Then she picked up the completed form, turned away, and walked to the registration counter to submit the paperwork. She didn't look back. Monica stood there, watching Kira's back. The thin smile on her lips slowly disappeared. In its place was something else, something Monica didn't want to admit, but it was there, as clear as the sunlight falling across the racetrack. Fear. Monica remembered last season. She remembered the feeling of standing on the racetrack and watching Kira Dawson, the daughter of a hired horse caretaker, with no money, no connections, and no one backing her, almost overtake her in the final meters. In that moment, Monica had seen her future threatened by a girl who was never supposed to have been on that racetrack at all. And she had done everything to make sure it would never happen again. But now Kira was coming back. She was registering to compete. She was standing here, with her back straight, her eyes without fear, telling Monica that the racetrack would answer. Monica clenched her hand, her fingernails pressing deep into her palm. She turned and walked back toward her horse, climbed up, tightened the reins, and galloped back onto the track. She rode faster than usual that day, much faster, as though she were trying to outrun something chasing her. 10 days after the confrontation at the racetrack, Monica made her move. not with words this time. That night, Grayson's farm was quiet, the way it was every other night. Kira had finished her training session at nearly 4 o'clock in the morning and left. The manager checked the stables one last time, then turned off the lights in the main area, leaving only the dim security lights along the hallway. Storm stood still in his stall, his head lowered, asleep. At 4:47 in the morning, the security camera mounted in the corner of the stable recorded a shadowed figure. That person wore a dark hoodie, a baseball cap pulled low to hide the face, and moved quickly and precisely down the stable hallway. That person clearly knew the location of the camera, because they always kept their face angled away, but they didn't know Grayson had installed an additional hidden camera in the opposite corner after Troy began investigating Kira's accident. The hidden camera recorded it clearly. The person stopped in front of Storm's stall, opened the door, and stepped inside. Storm startled awake, but before the horse could react, that person quickly poured something from a small bag into the feed trough. Then they backed out, closed the stall door, and left the same way they had come. The entire process took less than 3 minutes. The next morning, Kira arrived at the farm earlier than usual. She had just stepped into the stable hallway when she heard Storm. It wasn't the normal neigh the horse always used to greet her, but a continuous, high, urgent neighing. Kira hurried to Storm's stall and looked inside. Storm was pacing in circles inside the stall, unable to stop. The horse's eyes were wide, his pupils dilated. His whole body trembled faintly. The muscles beneath his black coat stretched tight. He kept stamping his hooves against the floor, lifting his head high, then lowering it again, over and over. When Kira opened the stall door and stepped inside, Storm neighed, recognizing her. But he didn't come close the way he usually did. He only kept circling, unable to control himself. Kira reached out, trying to stroke Storm's neck, but the horse backed away and shook his head. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't stand still. Something was making his body act beyond his control. "Something's wrong," Kira said to the manager standing behind her, her voice trying to stay calm, though her eyes said everything. She knew horses. She knew Storm. And she knew this wasn't normal behavior. She called the veterinarian immediately. The doctor arrived within 40 minutes. He examined Storm, checked his heart rate, examined his pupils, then took a blood sample. Kira stood outside the stall door the entire time, both hands gripping the iron bars, her eyes never leaving Storm. The horse was still pacing in circles, his breathing heavy, sweat beginning to wet his neck and shoulders. 1 hour later, the blood test results came back. The veterinarian looked at Kira, then down at the result sheet, his voice careful. Storm tested positive for a banned substance. The concentration is quite high. Someone gave him something to eat or drink containing this substance, most likely within the past 12 hours. Kira stood there, unable to say anything. She knew what this result meant. If this abnormal test result was submitted to the Federation, she would be banned from competing for life. There would be no need to prove whether she was involved or not. The rules were clear. The horse's owner and jockey were responsible for the condition of the racehorse. Storm testing positive meant Kira had violated the rules. Her career would be over, this time, forever. There would be no chance to return again. Kira gripped the edge of the stall so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She only stood there, looking at Storm through the stall door, the horse she had spent so many nights rebuilding a bond with, now pacing in helpless circles because of something someone had put into his feed. Footsteps sounded behind her. Grayson stepped into the stable, followed by Troy. Grayson looked at Storm, then at Kira, then at the veterinarian. He didn't ask what had happened because he already knew. "I reviewed last night's cameras at 5 o'clock this morning," Grayson said, his voice calm, though there was something colder than usual beneath that calm. Someone broke into Storm's stall close to 5 in the morning. The hidden camera captured the images clearly. Kira looked at Grayson, her eyes wide. Grayson continued, looking directly into her eyes. "It isn't your fault. Someone wants you removed from the race without needing to reach the racetrack. They want to end you from inside the stable." He turned to the veterinarian. "Detox Storm completely. Do whatever is necessary to help him recover as quickly as possible. I want him completely clean before any official inspection takes place." Then he turned to Troy. "Today's test results, the camera footage, everything. Back it up and preserve it. That is evidence." Grayson looked back at Kira. "Storm will be all right. You focus on your work. Whoever did this will pay." Kira said nothing. She turned back to look at Storm through the stall door. The pure black horse was still pacing in circles, but when he turned his head toward Kira, he stopped for one beat and looked at her. Just one brief beat. Then he went on pacing again. Kira gripped the edge of the stall even tighter. She didn't know who was behind this, but she knew one thing. Someone didn't just want her to lose. They wanted her never to race again. And this time, they had targeted Storm. 3 days after what happened to Storm, Monica Voss received a call from an unknown number. The caller didn't give a name, only said that someone wanted to meet her to discuss a matter related to the upcoming horse racing tournament, and suggested that she come to a restaurant in the North Shore area of Chicago the following evening at 7 o'clock. Monica hesitated. She wasn't used to meeting strangers like this. But after the encounter with Kira at the racetrack and the call from Barrett, she was in a state of heightened alert. She wanted to know who this was and what they knew. She decided to go. The restaurant stood at the end of a quiet street, its front discreet, without any large sign. Monica pushed the door open and immediately realized this wasn't the kind of restaurant meant for the public. There were no other diners. The entire space was empty, with only one table set in the middle of the room, pale yellow light shining down from the ceiling. Grayson Hale sat at that table, alone. In front of him was a glass of water, untouched. He didn't stand when Monica walked in. No greeting, no smile, no social courtesy of any kind. He simply watched her walk from the door to the table with cold, steady eyes. The gaze of a man who already knew exactly where this conversation would go before it even began. Monica sat down across from Grayson. She didn't know who this man was yet. Barrett had told her about Grayson Hale, but she had never met him. In front of her now was a man in his 30s, dressed in a dark suit, wearing no watch, no ring, nothing unnecessary on his body. He looked like a successful businessman, and Monica assumed that was exactly what he was. "Who are you?" Monica asked, her voice well-controlled, polite but direct. "And why do you want to meet me?" Grayson didn't answer the question. Instead, he reached beneath the table, took out a thick brown envelope, and placed it in front of Monica. "Open it," he said. Only 2 words. Monica looked at the envelope, then at Grayson. She hesitated for 1 second, then opened it. Inside were 4 sets of documents, each clipped separately with a paper clip. Monica took out the first set, printed images from a security camera, clear footage of a person in a dark hoodie standing inside Storm's stall, holding a small bag, pouring something into the feed trough. The angle of the image clearly showed that person's face, even though he had tried to hide it, and Monica recognized him at once. It was the man she had hired. Monica's hand stopped on the photographs. She didn't turn any more pages, but her eyes had already seen the second set, Storm's abnormal test results, bearing the veterinarian's stamp and confirming signature. The third set, she only read the first line before stopping. It was a notarized statement, and the name at the top of the page was Ray Whitmore, the saddler. Monica felt the blood drain from her face. The fourth set, she didn't need to open. She had seen enough. But Grayson spoke, his voice still even, neither rising nor falling, as though he were reading a clause in a contract. "The last set is a copy of messages from the phone number registered under Craig Hoffman, the assistant trainer on your team. The messages exchanged with Ray Whitmore about replacing the girth strap on Kira Dawson's saddle before last season's training session." Monica set the documents down on the table. Her hand began to tremble faintly, but she clenched it and hid it beneath the table. She looked straight at Grayson, trying to keep her voice steady. "What do you want?" "You have one choice," Grayson said, leaning back in his chair, both hands resting on the table, completely relaxed. "Withdraw from the tournament yourself. Publicly give whatever reason you want. Injury, personal reasons. I don't care. But you withdraw. If not, everything on this table will reach the Horse Racing Federation and the media within 48 hours. Monica gritted her teeth. "Are you threatening me?" Grayson looked at her. He didn't blink, didn't curl his mouth, didn't show any expression at all. "I never threaten anyone, Monica. I only tell them what will happen." That sentence wasn't loud. It didn't carry the weight of shouting or slamming a hand on the table, but it was heavier than any threat Monica had ever heard. Because she looked into Grayson's eyes and realized one thing. This wasn't a businessman. This wasn't a man negotiating. This was a man informing her. His voice didn't rise because it didn't need to rise. His eyes weren't angry because he had passed beyond anger long ago. He sat there, calm, in complete control. as though everything in that room, from the table to the lights to the person sitting across from him, was in his hands, and Monica understood that it truly was. She stood up without saying anything more. She left the envelope on the table, turned around, and walked toward the door. When her hand pushed open the restaurant door, it trembled. Not because of the cold. Monica stepped outside, and the Chicago night air rushed against her face, but she couldn't feel anything. Her mind was spinning, hundreds of thoughts overlapping. She knew Grayson wasn't playing around. 48 hours. She had 48 hours. But Monica Voss wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat. She hadn't accepted losing to Kira on the racetrack, and she wouldn't accept losing to the man in that restaurant. When she got into the car, Monica took out her phone. Her hand was still shaking, but her mind had already started calculating. If Grayson Hale had a weapon, then she needed one too. And Barrett had given her something. Grayson Hale was a dangerous figure in Chicago's underworld. If the media knew that before Grayson had time to act, everything would turn upside down. Monica didn't withdraw. The 48 hours Grayson had given her hadn't even run out before she made the first move. Early the next morning, after leaving the restaurant, Monica contacted an investigative journalist at the Chicago Tribune, someone the Voss family had known for a long time. She met him at a coffee shop, bringing with her what Barrett had provided. She told him everything. Grayson Hale wasn't an ordinary businessman. He was a dangerous figure in Chicago's underworld, controlling multiple illegal business operations, using the racehorse farm as a front for money laundering. And Kira Dawson, the female jockey preparing to return to the racetrack, was in fact a puppet Grayson had set up to manipulate the national horse racing tournament, serving the betting interests of his organization. Monica spoke to the journalist in a worried, responsible voice, as though she were doing the right thing for the purity of the sport she loved. She didn't mention Barrett. She didn't mention any personal motive. She was merely the reigning champion, speaking out to protect fairness. The article went live within 24 hours. The headline ran large, naming Grayson Hale, naming the farm, naming Kira Dawson. From the Tribune, the news spread to sports sites, then across social media. Within 2 days, the story exploded. The Chicago Mafia's puppet jockey became a phrase appearing everywhere. The National Horse Racing Federation issued a statement. They would open an investigation into the connection between Kira Dawson and Grayson Hale, and would review Kira's eligibility to compete in the next season's tournament. Kira learned the news while she was on her way to the bar to start her shift. Her phone kept vibrating. Messages from old acquaintances in the horse racing world, most of them silent, but a few sending links to the article with question marks attached. Kira opened it and read it right there on the bus. She read the entire article, her face unchanged, but the hand holding the phone tightened with every line. When she reached the bar, things were even worse. 2 reporters and a cameraman were waiting in front of the entrance. They recognized her the moment she stepped off the bus. Kira Dawson? Do you have any comment on your relationship with Grayson Hale? Is it true you're being funded by an underground organization to compete? Kira didn't answer. She lowered her head, hurried past them, and pushed open the bar door. But inside, it wasn't any better. The owner was waiting for her right behind the counter, his face tense. He didn't greet her. He didn't ask how she was. He spoke directly, his voice embarrassed but firm. Kira, I don't want trouble. Reporters have been here since noon. Customers are starting to ask questions, and some people recognized you from the article. I run a small bar. I don't need this kind of attention. You should quit. Kira looked at him. No pleading, no anger. She only nodded, took off her apron, placed it on the counter, then walked out through the back door. She didn't want to pass the reporters at the front entrance again. At the same time, on the other side of the city, Grayson was dealing with the source of the storm. He read the article early that morning, and he didn't need much time to understand where the information had come from. There was only one person in his organization who knew enough details about his connection to Kira and also had ties to the Voss family. Barrett. Troy confirmed it within 3 hours. He traced the call history between Barrett and Monica, including the call on the evening Barrett had left Grayson's office after their argument about the charity fund several weeks earlier. Grayson didn't call Barrett right away. He waited until evening. Then he sent a brief message. Come see me. 9 o'clock. Barrett arrived on time. He stepped into Grayson's office and saw Troy standing in the corner with his arms folded. Barrett knew at once that something was wrong, but he still sat down, trying to keep his expression normal. Grayson didn't greet him. He placed on the desk a printed call history between Barrett and Monica Voss. Times, durations, frequency. Barrett looked down at the paper, then looked up at Grayson. He didn't deny it. There was no use denying anything in front of Grayson. "I did what was best for the organization," Barrett said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're losing focus, Grayson. You're out of the organization before morning," Grayson cut in, his voice not rising, even softer than usual. And that was what made the sentence 10 times heavier. "Everything you have passed through me. Accounts, properties, relationships, all of it. You understand that." Barrett looked at Grayson, trying to find some opening, some sign that this was a threat that could be negotiated. But there was none. Grayson's eyes were flat and still, like the surface of a frozen lake. No anger, no hatred, only decision. Barrett stood up. He said nothing more. No apology, no justification, no begging. He knew the rules of the game, because he himself had lived inside those rules for 7 years. He walked out of the office, closed the door behind him, and Grayson knew it was the last time he would ever see Barrett. The office fell silent after Barrett left. Troy still stood in the corner, saying nothing. Grayson sat alone, looking at the printed call history on the desk. He had just lost someone who had been tied to the organization for 7 years. Someone who held a network of finance and relationships that wouldn't be easy to replace. The organization would weaken in the short term. Some partners would waver, and some deals would be interrupted. Grayson knew all of that, but he didn't regret it. Close to midnight that night, Grayson drove to the farm alone. No Troy, no one else. He parked outside the gate and walked along the dirt road leading into the stable area. The night was cold, his breath forming a thin mist in the air, but he didn't button his coat any tighter. The farm was silent. Dim security lights shone along the stable hallway, casting pale yellow streaks across the wooden floor. Grayson stepped into the corridor, his shoes tapping lightly against the floor, the only sound in that quiet space. He stopped in front of Storm's stall. The pure black horse was standing still in the corner, his head lowered. Storm had recovered after the banned substance had been put into his feed, and the veterinarian had detoxed him completely. But the horse was still quieter than usual, as though he too could feel that something in the world around him wasn't right. When Grayson stood before the stall door, Storm lifted his head and looked at him. 2 glossy black eyes reflected the dim light, staring straight at Grayson. Then Storm remained still. He didn't come closer. He didn't neigh in greeting. He didn't nudge his muzzle against Grayson's shoulder the way he always did with Kira. The horse only looked at him, then turned his head away and stayed standing in the corner of the stall. Storm only trusted Kira, and Grayson wasn't Kira. Grayson opened the stall door and stepped inside. He didn't move close to Storm. He stood on the opposite side, his back against the wooden wall, both hands loose at his sides. He said nothing. He didn't stroke the horse, didn't call its name, didn't do anything at all. He only stood there, inside the horse stall, at midnight, alone. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Storm stood in one corner, Grayson in another. 2 living beings inside the same small space, completely silent, neither one touching the other. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Troy appeared at the stable door. He had driven over after calling Grayson and getting no answer. Troy looked inside and saw his boss standing against the stall wall, across from the black horse, in the darkness. "Do you need anything?" Troy asked, his voice softer than usual. "No," one word. Grayson didn't turn back to look at Troy. He still stood there, his eyes lowered to the stable floor. Troy didn't ask anything more. He stood at the stall door for a few more seconds, watching Grayson. In all the years they had worked together, Troy had seen Grayson face many things: partners' betrayals, police investigations, rivals' threats. Each time, Grayson handled them with the cold calm Troy knew too well. But tonight was different. Grayson wasn't handling anything. He wasn't calculating, wasn't making plans, wasn't waiting for information. He was only standing inside a horse stall at midnight, alone, saying nothing, and Troy understood. For the first time in many years, Grayson Hale was worried about someone other than himself. Troy turned away and walked off, leaving Grayson alone with Storm and the silence. Kira returned to her rented room close to 10 o'clock that night. It was a small room on the 3rd floor of an old apartment building on the south side of Chicago. 1 bedroom, a little kitchen corner, and 1 window looking out over the parking lot. She closed the door and didn't turn on the light. She sat down on the edge of the bed, took off her shoes, and set them on the floor. Then she sat there in the dark, doing nothing. Her phone lay on the bedside table, the screen lighting up over and over again. Messages from unknown numbers, notifications from social media, missed calls from reporters she didn't know had gotten her number from where. She didn't open any of them. She knew what they said. Her name was everywhere, but not as a jockey. As the Mafia's puppet. Everything she had rebuilt over the past 2 months, the nights training with Storm, the laps growing faster and faster, the first smile after a year, all of it was being buried beneath a storm she hadn't caused and couldn't control. She had lost her job at the bar. She had no income. She didn't know where next month's rent would come from. The Federation was investigating her eligibility to compete. And out there, people who knew nothing about her were calling her names she didn't want to repeat. Kira sat on the bed, looking at the phone. Then she picked it up, scrolled past all the messages and missed calls without opening any of them, and went all the way down to the end of her contact list. She stopped at one name. Mom. She pressed call. The phone rang 4 times before someone answered. Kira? My girl? Her mother's voice was warm, a little hoarse, the voice of someone used to staying up late waiting for the phone, even when no one called often. Her mother lived in rural Kentucky, in the small house her father had left behind, alone since he died. She didn't use social media, didn't read sports newspapers, and knew nothing about what was happening to her daughter in Chicago. Mom, it's me. Are you asleep yet? Not yet. I'm looking through some old photographs. There's one of your father leading a horse out to the racetrack. Remember? Back when you just started working at Whitfield Farm. Your father was smiling so brightly in that picture. Kira closed her eyes. I remember. How's your work at the bar, sweetheart? Are you tired? Are you eating enough? I'm fine, Mom. Everything's fine. You sound tired. I'm just a little tired. Night shifts are like that. Silence passed through the phone for a few seconds. Kira heard her mother's soft breathing, the kind of breath that belonged to someone wondering whether she should say more. Then her mother spoke, her voice slower now, gentler, but each word clear. Kira, I don't know what you're going through. Maybe you don't want to tell me, and I understand. But whatever it is, you just do the thing that would make your father proud. Kira opened her eyes. She stared up at the ceiling of the rented room, at the old water stains spread across it, while the streetlight outside came through the curtains and cast faint streaks across the wall. Yes, I know, Mom. Your father always believed in you. So do I. You remember that, all right? Yes, I remember. All right, go to sleep early. Don't stay up too late. Yes. You sleep early too, Mom. Kira hung up. She set the phone back down on the bedside table. The screen went dark, and the rented room sank into complete darkness. She sat there, both hands resting on her thighs, staring straight ahead, looking at nothing at all. Then the tears fell. There was no sobbing, no broken sound in her throat. The tears simply slid down her cheeks in silence, as though her body had held them back for too long and could no longer keep them in. For the first time since the story began, Kira Dawson cried. Not because she was angry, not because she had been wronged, not because she had lost her job or her reputation, but because she had heard her mother say, "Your father always believed in you," and she realized she was lonelier than she had thought. She missed her father. She missed those mornings during her first year working at Whitfield Farm, when her father led the first horse out to the racetrack and taught her how to hold the reins, how to sit steady on a horse's back. Her father had told her something she never forgot. A horse knows when the rider is afraid. Don't ever let it see that you're scared. Kira sat in the darkness, tears still falling, and she wondered what her father would think if he could see her now, his daughter, sitting alone in a dark rented room, with nothing left, crying by herself. Then she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But she didn't stand up. Not yet. She only sat there, in the dark, and let the silence swallow everything. The next morning, Kira came to the farm. Not at midnight the way she always did, but in the middle of the day, at 10 o'clock in the morning. Sunlight fell across the racetrack. The ground was dry, and a light wind moved through the meadows on both sides. In the daytime, the farm looked completely different from how it looked at night. Wider, brighter, but to Kira now, everything looked the same. She stepped into the stable hallway and went straight to Storm's stall. The pure black horse was standing near the stall door, as though he had heard her footsteps from far away. When Kira opened the stall door and stepped inside, Storm came to her immediately, nudging his muzzle against her shoulder, gentle and familiar, the kind of greeting he gave only to her. Kira placed her hand on Storm's face, stroking him from his forehead down to his nose. The horse stood still, his eyes closed, his warm breath passing over her hand. Kira stayed there with Storm for a long while. Then she did something she had never done since coming to this farm. She walked to the rack on the stall wall and took down the saddle and bridle, but not to saddle Storm. She held the tack, folded it neatly, then hung it on the highest hook on the wall, the kind of place where, once hung, it wouldn't be convenient to take down again, the way a person hangs something when they don't intend to use it anymore. She stroked Storm's face once more. The horse opened his eyes and looked at her, his head tilting slightly to one side. Kira looked back at him, then turned and walked out of the stall. She closed the stall door and didn't look back. She walked down the hallway, out of the stable area, across the yard, and toward the gate. She walked straight ahead, her back still as straight as always, but her steps were heavier. She had decided. No more racing, no more coming back. It was over. In the surveillance room inside the main building, Grayson sat in front of the camera monitors. He saw everything. Kira entering the stall, stroking Storm's face, hanging the tack on the wall, turning her back, and leaving. He saw the way she closed the stall door. He saw her footsteps as she left the farm. He understood the meaning of the saddle and bridle hanging on the highest hook. Grayson didn't stand up. He didn't call Kira. He didn't go outside and chase after her. He sat there, watching the camera screen until Kira's figure disappeared beyond the gate. Then he picked up his phone and called Troy. The Kira Dawson investigation file. The press photo section. Is there any photo from the first regional tournament she won? Troy checked and confirmed. During the background investigation into Kira, Troy had saved many old sports articles, including a photograph from the regional horse race Kira had won when she was 23. The picture showed Kira right after crossing the finish line, bending down to embrace the horse's neck, her face smiling, the kind of smile that belonged to someone who had just proven to the world that she belonged there. "Print it for me," Grayson said. "One copy." The next morning, Kira opened the door of her rented room to go buy coffee. In front of the door, on the floor, lay a white envelope, no sender's name, no address, nothing on the outside. She picked it up and opened it. Inside was a photograph printed on ordinary paper. Kira looked at the photograph and stopped. It was her on horseback, when she was 23 years old, right after winning her first regional tournament. She was bending down to embrace the horse's neck, her face pressed against the horse's mane, and she was smiling, not a smile for the camera, but the smile of someone who was truly happy, the kind of smile whose feelings she had forgotten. Kira turned the photograph over. On the back, there was one handwritten line, the writing neat, straight, and unadorned. This girl never needed anyone's permission to race. Kira stood in the doorway of her rented room, holding the photograph. Her hand trembled. She looked at the line on the back of the photograph, then turned it over to look at the picture, then turned it back again to look at the words. She stood there for a very long time, long enough that the neighbor opened their door and looked at her strangely. But she didn't notice. She only looked at the photograph, looked at the 23-year-old girl smiling on horseback. That girl didn't know fear. That girl didn't ask anyone whether she was allowed or not. That girl only knew how to ride, and how to run faster than everyone else. That afternoon, Kira returned to the farm. She stepped into Storm's stall. The pure black horse lifted his head when he heard her, and this time, he gave a soft neigh, a short sound, not loud, but inside the quiet stable, it rang as though Storm were saying, "I knew you'd come back." Kira walked to the rack, reached up to the highest hook, and took the saddle and bridle down. She saddled Storm, every movement precise and practiced. When she tightened the girth strap, she checked it more carefully than usual, her hand moving over every seam, every buckle. Then she led Storm out to the racetrack. The farm manager saw her from a distance and nodded. Earlier that day, he had received instructions from Grayson that Kira Dawson would be working at the farm from now on, in charge of caring for the horses. A real job, with a salary and a clear schedule. Not a favor. It was the work Kira had known how to do since the first year she stepped onto her father's farm in Kentucky. Kira mounted Storm and tightened her knees lightly. The pure black horse began to run. Kira trained with Storm for 3 straight days after coming back. She didn't speak to anyone except the farm manager and the trainer. She came, trained, cared for the horse, then returned to the small room the farm had arranged for its staff. But throughout those 3 days, one thing kept turning over and over in her mind. The article. The lines on the internet. A dangerous figure in Chicago's underworld. She had read all of it. Every article, every comment, and she needed to know the truth. On the afternoon of the 4th day, Kira saw Grayson's car parked in front of the main building. She was leading Storm back to the stable after training when she saw him step out through the main door, saying something to the manager. Kira handed Storm to a stable hand, then walked straight toward Grayson. He saw her coming, stopped, and waited. Kira stopped about 3 steps away from him. She didn't greet him. She didn't begin with polite conversation. She asked directly, her voice clear, her eyes looking straight into his. "Who are you, really? What the press wrote about you? I read all of it. Is it true or fabricated?" Grayson looked at Kira. Around them, the farm was still operating as usual, the sound of horses neighing in the distance, the voices of workers talking near the stables, but the space between the two of them now seemed separate from everything else. Grayson didn't circle around it. He never circled around anything. "It's true," he said. His voice was flat, neither rising nor falling, offering no justification, no apology. "I'm the man the press is writing about. Not every detail is right, but the overall picture is. I'm not an ordinary businessman, Kira. You've known that for a long time. You just haven't asked." Kira didn't look surprised. Maybe, deep down, she had known since that first night in the bar, when a strange man knew her name, knew her past, and offered her the use of a private horse farm without asking for anything in return. No ordinary businessman did that. But knowing it, and hearing him confirm it with his own mouth, were 2 different things. "Then why are you helping me?" Kira asked. Her voice wasn't angry, wasn't accusing. She only wanted to understand. "What do you want from me? I don't have anything to trade. No money, no power, nothing." Grayson was silent for a beat. Then he spoke, slower than usual, as though he were weighing each word. Not because he was pretending, but because this was one of the rare times he was telling the truth about something he wasn't used to speaking about. "I don't want anything from you. Not money, not power, not gratitude." He paused, looking toward the distant racetrack, where traces still remained from the laps Kira had run that morning. "I live in a world where almost everything can be bought or forced. People are loyal because of fear or because of interest. I'm used to that. But the night I saw you in the bar, when you looked up at the TV and then lowered your head to wipe the table, I saw something else. I saw someone with real talent being buried by cheaters, and no one was doing anything. No one cared." Grayson turned back to Kira. "I simply couldn't stand that. Not because of you, because of me. Because if I knew about it and did nothing, I'd be no different from the people I despise," he continued, his voice returning to its familiar flat calm. "You can leave now. I won't stop you. Knowing who I am, you have every reason to walk away from here and never come back. No one would blame you. But if you race for yourself, not for me." Silence. The wind moved through the meadow, brushing through Kira's hair, carrying the familiar scent of grass and horses. Kira looked at Grayson. She had met many kinds of people in her life. People who promised and then forgot. People who helped because they wanted something. People who pitied her and then vanished when things became difficult. But the man standing in front of her now had just admitted who he was, without hiding, without defending himself, and told her she could walk away. For the first time since meeting Grayson, Kira didn't see the owner of the farm, didn't see a powerful figure, didn't see the man the press was calling all kinds of names. She only saw someone telling the truth. Then Grayson added, his voice quieter, "I know who hurt you last year, Kira. I have evidence, complete evidence, but whether to use it or not, and how to use it, is your decision, not mine." Kira felt her heart beat harder. She had long suspected that last year's accident hadn't been an accident. But hearing Grayson confirm it, knowing there was evidence, knowing the truth was now within her reach, felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted. She didn't ask who had hurt her. She didn't need to ask. In her heart, she already knew. From the way Monica had looked at her at the racetrack, from the way Monica had said, "Know your place," from the fear in Monica's eyes when she watched Kira ride Storm, Kira drew in a deep breath. The meadows around them rippled in the wind. From far away, Storm's neigh sounded from the stable, small but clear. Kira looked straight into Grayson's eyes and said, "I race for my father." Grayson nodded, a slow nod, without saying anything more. Then he turned and walked back toward his car. Kira stayed where she was, watching him, then turned toward the stable. Behind her, Grayson's car started and drove away. In front of her, Storm was standing at the stall door, his head held high, watching her come. That evening, Kira sat in the small room at the farm, the room she had been given when she started working there. It wasn't spacious, just a single bed, a wooden desk, and one window looking out toward the stables. It was simpler than her old rented room in Chicago, but when she opened the window, she could hear the horses breathing steadily in the night, and to her now, that was more precious than anything else. Kira set her phone on the desk and leaned it against the wall. She looked at the phone for a long time, then pressed the record button. No script, no rehearsal, no adjusting the light, no choosing an angle. Just her, sitting on the bed, looking into the lens, and speaking. "I'm Kira Dawson. A lot of people are talking about me these days, and most of what they're saying isn't true. So I want to speak plainly, once, with my own mouth." She drew in a breath. Not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to make sure every word she said was clear. "I'm not involved in any of Grayson Hale's activities. I don't know, and I don't care about his business. I came to his farm for one reason only, to train for horse racing. I trained with my own strength, every night, after finishing my shift. No one races for me. No one rides the horse for me. No one feels the pain for me when my leg still hasn't fully healed and I still climb onto a horse's back every day." She paused for a beat, her eyes looking straight into the camera. "But I'm not recording this video to defend myself. I'm recording it because there is something more important. I have evidence showing that my accident last year wasn't an accident. Someone deliberately sabotaged my equipment so I would be injured on the racetrack. And recently, that same person continued targeting the horse I'm training with, trying to remove me from the tournament by every means possible. I've sent the full evidence file to the National Horse Racing Federation. I'm asking the Federation to review it seriously." Kira was silent for 1 second. Then she spoke again, her voice slowing, softer now, but not weaker. "I only want to race fairly. If I lose on the racetrack, I'll accept it. I've lost many times in my life, and I've still gotten back up, but I don't accept being eliminated by things that happen outside the racetrack. No one should be eliminated that way." She looked into the camera for 1 more second, then pressed stop. The video was less than 2 minutes long. Kira watched it once, didn't edit anything, then posted it on social media. She didn't have many followers, only a few hundred, most of them from the time when she was still competing. But within the first hour, the video was shared by a former jockey Kira had once raced against, then another person. Then a small sports news page reposted it. By the next morning, the video had hundreds of thousands of views. Not because Kira was famous, not because she was a skilled speaker, but because she was telling the truth. In an age where everything passed through filters, through editing, through media teams, a girl sitting on a bed in a small room, speaking directly into a phone camera with a slightly trembling voice that was not weak at all, reached people in a way no PR campaign could. The comments beneath the video poured in. Some people supported her, some still doubted her, but the story was no longer one-sided. The name Kira Dawson was now attached not only to Mafia Puppet, but to a larger question. Who had sabotaged her? And why? That same day, Kira went to the post office in the small town near the farm. She brought a thick envelope with her, containing the evidence file Grayson had prepared for her. She didn't open it to check again, because she had read every page the night before. She knew everything inside it, and she knew it was heavy enough to change everything. Kira wrote the address of the National Horse Racing Federation on the envelope by hand, put on the stamp, then handed it to the postal clerk. She watched the envelope disappear behind the counter, then stepped outside. Sunlight fell across her face. She had done her part. Now, there was only the racetrack. Race day arrived. The racetrack was packed. The stands were crowded with people, noise rolling everywhere, and thousands had poured in to watch this season's national final, a tournament that carried more stories this year than any season before it. Kira Dawson, the female jockey who had disappeared and then returned. Monica Voss, the reigning champion under investigation. Kira's video online. The article about Grayson Hale. Everything had gathered into one day, one racetrack, one race. The Federation hadn't concluded its investigation yet, so both Kira and Monica were allowed to compete. Kira led Storm into the preparation area. The pure black horse walked steadily, his head held high, his black mane moving lightly in the wind. Around them were the other racehorses, the voices of people, the sound of loudspeakers, the music coming from the stands. Storm stayed calm in the middle of it all, as though nothing in this world could distract him. Kira checked the saddle and bridle one last time. Her hand moved over every seam, every buckle, every section of the strap. She checked slowly, carefully, missing no detail. Then she stood in front of Storm and placed both hands on the horse's face. Storm lowered his head to the level of her eyes. Kira leaned close and whispered into Storm's ear. No one heard what she said. Just as her father had once done before every race, placing his hand on a horse's face, speaking softly into its ear, then stepping up into the saddle, Kira mounted. Her hand held the reins, firm and light at the same time. She led Storm to the starting gate. Monica Voss was already there, sitting on the back of a tall brown horse, looking straight ahead. The two women didn't look at each other. There was no need to look. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. The racetrack stretched long before them, the ground packed tight, white fences running along both sides. The stands on either side were roaring, but Kira heard nothing. She only heard Storm's breathing, steady, powerful, ready. The starting bell rang. Storm shot out of the gate like a black arrow. Kira lowered herself, pressing her chest close to the horse's neck, both hands holding the reins near his mane. Wind slammed into her face, so hard she could barely open her eyes all the way. Hooves pounded against the ground, dirt flew behind them, and the wind tore past her ears. Storm ran in the leading group from the very first meters. The pure black horse didn't need anyone to push him. He knew his speed, knew the racetrack, knew what the rider on his back wanted. Kira and Storm ran as one. Not a person controlling a horse, but two living beings sharing one breath, one direction, one purpose. At the first turn, Storm cut cleanly, and Kira leaned with him, perfectly. At the second turn, she passed two jockeys ahead of her, and Storm accelerated smoothly. Monica was right behind them, one horse length away. Kira could feel Monica's presence there, but she didn't look back. Never look back. The third turn, the track began curving left, the ground sloping slightly. Kira leaned with it, pressing her right knee into Storm's side to keep her balance. And at that exact moment, pain stabbed through her right leg. It burst from her heel, shot through her calf, and reached her knee. The old injury, the wound she had thought had healed, suddenly woke at the worst possible moment. Kira lost her balance. Her body tilted to the right, her shoulder slipping off the center line of the horse's back. In that instant, she nearly slid out of the saddle. The stands held their breath. Thousands of people stopped shouting, stopped breathing at the same time, watching the girl on the black horse sway through the high-speed turn. Kira gritted her teeth. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She drove her left knee into Storm's side, tightened the muscles in her thigh, and pulled the center of her body back into place. The pain still tore through her right leg, but she didn't let go. She held on to Storm with everything she had, with muscle, with will, with the long nights of training on the racetrack at midnight when no one had seen her. Storm felt it. The pure black horse felt the rider on his back losing her balance, and he responded with an instinct no one could teach. He lowered his head, steadied himself, then accelerated, not gradually, but explosively. At the final turn, where most racehorses slowed down for safety, Storm sped up. The four legs of the pure black horse struck the ground so quickly that the sound of his hooves became like a relentless drumbeat. He ran as though he had never run before. Kira lay low against Storm's back, her face pressed into his mane, both arms wrapped tightly around his neck. She wasn't riding perfectly. Her posture was off. Her right leg had almost no strength left, and she was clinging to Storm with her hands and her left knee more than with any technique she had ever been taught. But she didn't let go, and Storm didn't stop. The final straightaway. Monica was behind them, 2 horse lengths away. 3 horse lengths. 4. Storm crossed the finish line. The bell rang. Then the stands exploded. Kira lay against Storm's back, gasping, her whole body trembling. Sweat had soaked her back, and her hands were still wrapped around the horse's neck, refusing to let go. Storm slowed from a gallop to a trot, then to a walk. Heat rose from the black horse's body, sweat gleaming on his sleek coat. Kira opened her eyes. She lay on Storm's back, her face pressed into his mane, listening to the horse's heart pounding beneath her. Around them, the spectators rose to their feet, not only applauding the winner, but applauding the girl who had almost fallen at the third turn and refused to let go. Right after Kira and Storm crossed the finish line, the organizers asked all the jockeys and their teams to remain in the racetrack area. The loudspeakers announced that the National Horse Racing Federation would make an official statement before the awards ceremony. The stands stirred with noise. Kira got down from the horse, her hand still resting on Storm's neck, waiting. She didn't know what was about to happen, but she could feel the heavy air surrounding the racetrack, the kind of heaviness that comes before a storm breaks. 15 minutes later, the president of the federation stepped up to the microphone in the awards area. He read a short statement, his voice official, every word clear. The Federation had completed its investigation based on the evidence file received. Conclusion: Monica Voss was stripped of all titles, including last season's national championship, and permanently banned from competing on every racetrack under the Federation's system. Reason: sabotaging a competitor's racing equipment in a way that endangered life, and using a banned substance on a racehorse. The stands erupted. Whispers, shouts, applause, everything mixed together into one chaotic mass. But Kira heard none of it. She stood beside Storm, her hand lightly stroking the horse's mane, her eyes looking toward Monica. Monica stood about 20 meters away, beside the brown horse she had just ridden in the race. Her hand was still gripping the reins tightly, as though that were the only thing keeping her on her feet. Her eyes were red, but there were no tears. Monica looked at Kira. This time, there was no hatred left in her eyes, no contempt, no fear, only emptiness, the kind of emptiness that belongs to someone who has just watched everything she built collapse, and knows that her own hand pushed the first brick loose. Monica released the reins, turned around, and walked away, alone. No one ran after her. No trainer, no team, no family. Her figure grew smaller along the path leading toward the back of the racetrack, then disappeared beyond the bend. She had lost everything, and she had done it to herself. 15 minutes by car from the racetrack, Grayson Hale sat in his private car, parked by the roadside, the windows closed. He wasn't at the racetrack. He wasn't sitting in the stands, wasn't standing by the fence, wasn't anywhere a camera could capture him. His phone vibrated. Troy. She won. 2 words. Grayson nodded, though Troy couldn't see it. Then he ended the call and set the phone on the seat beside him. He sat there for a little longer, looking out through the window. Then he started the car and drove away. That night, Kira returned to the farm. She didn't celebrate at the racetrack, didn't answer interviews, didn't stay for photographs. She only wanted to go back to Storm. When she stepped into the stable area, the lights were already on. Storm stood still in his stall, his head lifting when he heard the familiar footsteps, and on the threshold of the stable, Grayson was sitting. His back rested against the wooden doorframe, his legs stretched out, both hands placed on his thighs. Beside him on the ground was a new saddle and bridle, dark brown leather, shining steel buckles, stitching as even as a row of tiny marks made by a careful hand. On the reins, 2 names were engraved, Kira and Storm. Kira looked at the saddle and bridle, then looked at Grayson. She said nothing. She sat down on the threshold beside him, leaving just enough distance between them. Silence, the steady sound of Storm breathing inside the stall, the soft wind moving through the stable roof, the insects calling from the meadow outside. "You didn't come watch me race," Kira said, her voice light, not accusing, only speaking. "I didn't need to watch," Grayson replied, his eyes looking straight ahead. "I knew you wouldn't stop. I almost fell at the turn. Almost isn't falling." Kira said nothing more. Neither did Grayson. They sat there, inside the stable, beneath the dim yellow light, in a silence neither of them needed to fill. Then Storm reached his head through the stall door and nudged his muzzle against Kira's shoulder. Gentle, familiar, the kind of greeting the pure black horse gave only to her. Kira lifted her hand and stroked Storm's face, and she laughed. Not the small, faint smile from before. This was a real laugh, rising from her chest, sounding softly inside the quiet stable. For the first time in a very long while, Kira Dawson laughed without needing to hide it, without needing to hold it back, without needing to wait for anyone's permission. Early the next morning, the sun hadn't fully risen yet. and the first light of day lay across the racetrack, turning the meadows on both sides gold. Kira rode Storm on the track, slow, at an easy trot. Not training, not competing, just her and Storm, on the racetrack, in the morning light. Grayson stood by the wooden fence, holding a cup of coffee, watching Kira and Storm pass in front of him. No more words were needed. The racetrack, the pure black horse, the first sunlight of the day, and two people who found each other in a place neither of them had expected. Kira's story reminds us that no matter how many times life knocks us down, the most important thing is whether we dare to stand back up. Not stand up for someone else, but stand up for ourselves, for the people who believed in us, and for the dream we almost let go. Sometimes, help comes from the place we least expect. But in the end, the person who steps onto the racetrack still has to be us. If this story touched you, please press like and share the video so more people can hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the new stories we share every day. How did this story make you feel? Which character left the strongest impression on you? Please leave a comment. We're truly looking forward to hearing the feelings from deep inside your heart. Wishing everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Goodbye, and I'll see you again in the next video.